Welcome to Rising Woman Leaders, a safe space for women to thrive in community where their voices and stories are heard. We're a sisterhood supporting each other to live our dreams and embody the sacred feminine to restore balance on our planet. Join us each week as we return to the unconditional love and guidance of our heart and our womb. I'm your host, Meredith Ram, and I invite you to walk this path of beauty, devotion, and service with us. I'm here today with Kendra Cunov, who has worked with thousands of men, women, and couples in the areas of embodiment, intimacy, communication, and full self-expression. She's co-founded Authentic World and Fierce Grace, as well as the Embodied Relationship Training Salon with John Wineland, and pioneered some of the most cutting-edge relation work on the planet. She works with organizations and leaders, as well as men, women, and couples who know that embodied presence, truth, connection, and integrity are our truest access points to success in business and in love. So welcome, Kendra.
Thank you.
So Kendra and I know each other from Sonoma County, and it's always a blessing to invite people on the podcast that I've actually been in person with and really had that touch and that connection at different points. So it's beautiful to reconnect with you here today. And I'd love to start with asking you just about this idea of relating. It sounds like so much of your work is relationships, whether that be in love or in business or in partnership or friendships or family. And I'm curious, what do you think drew you to that work? Like, what in your life brought you into connection with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, I think you really put your finger on something, which is that it is true for me that I see everything as some kind of relationship. And that to me, that's where things are alive. There's object or subject or in these kinds of, but when we are engaged with the relationship between, whether that's between human beings or that's between other beings or, with our own selves, that's where the life is in the relationship piece. And the moment that I remember when you asked that question, and I'm getting curious, as you asked it, I'm kind of oh, I wonder about when I was a child, but the moment that I remember, I think I was about 19 or 20, and I was living in a Buddhist monastery at the time, and so we were doing a lot of zazen, mindfulness meditation, stillness meditation. And it's kind of solo practice, even though we were all living in this very small space together and monastery. And in some way we're really together. But the practice itself has a very solo quality. And I remember one morning we'd wake up really early, it would still be dark. And I think I was drinking my tea really close to the meditation hall. And I was watching everybody come and realizing that I could tell who they were, even if I couldn't see their faces. And I knew people's sort of habits and oh, that's so-and-so. And she's got her enormous jug of coffee that she chugs right before she enters the meditation hall. And that's so-and-so. And they do this particular thing with their shoes. And that's, and there really was, I think in that space, I was just very open to what would come in. So there was almost this literally came into my mind or being space was this question, what is this other thing that's happening beyond our solo practice? What is this relationship that's going on? And ultimately, I think that's what drew me out of the monastery, is that as much as that was there, it wasn't really explicitly addressed or worked with. we were more working in that personal or solo realm. And I was just very curious, like, no, wait, what is this other thing that we're doing as humans?
And you grew up on that monastery, correct?
I did. I lived like right in that, on that land, in that valley. I lived there until I was about 6. And then I lived nearby. I spent a lot of time there also as like an adolescent. And
yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that practice just being so, I don't know, the word that's coming up is maybe austere at times, like very just like in that more confined way. And I'm curious what your relationship to Tantra has been, because I think of Tantra as like embracing the material world and kind of like it's still very much spiritual, but it's embracing relationship and love and sexuality and like the gunk of life and all the everything. Has that been a part of your journey as well? Just
in like an explicit way, it has not. Whenever I've come in contact with what I would call real Tantra, I always feel that alignment, because everything that I've ever sort of practiced or any desire that I've had to teach or to transmit really has always been like from this world, that it's going to happen here in our relationships, like in our actual body, in our connection to the earth. And some of that distinction, really came from recognizing that there are some small subset of people who are truly meant to be monks. But it's like so tiny when you think about the whole population of humanity. I was like, most of us are going to be householders in some way, shape, or form, and really wanting to find that kind of spirituality and practice and devotion and intention. So I think a lot of my own movement through those things has been aligned with what I understand about Tantra, but I have never studied it really deeply or explicitly myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I was learning a little bit about a particular course that you lead, the No Man Diet. I was seeing that you were enrolling for that, starting that soon. And I read a little bit just about your journey of needing kind of a break from dating and a break from like looking for the one. And that sounds like it was a really powerful time in your life to reset patterns. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear just a little bit about what habit patterns maybe you had in your life that were more challenging in relationship, how you kind of reset that, and then also how you're helping people today, like what the kind of shifts you're seeing when people take that time.
Yeah. So if I zoom out a little bit, part of where that perspective comes from for me is it's actually around patience. And I'm myself a fairly impatient person, which is probably why I work with it, actually. And but I see in humans, myself included, this desire to just change. Like, oh, I see a thing. This is not how I want it. I know how I want it. Now let's do the other thing. Like, let's just get with the program.
Yeah.
And what I have found, both in like just being with my own self and then being with other people, is that often it's not quite as fast as that. That we do have moments where sometimes we can go from one way of being, or we have a truly, what might be like a transformational insight, or there's these things that change everything forever. But these processes of actually moving and gesturing and acting differently in our life often come with some time. And that often it's helpful to remove ourselves from like the inflaming or activating piece to, and if we think about it in the physical sense, sometimes if like we're breaking out in hives or we're having reaction to some sort of food, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, but sometimes it's like, oh, but I'm going to remove myself from what is like inflaming me in order to soothe everything and come back to neutrality, some positive homeostasis, if you will. And then I'm going to re-engage from that new place that's not inflamed or activated. And I would say even the seeking of something different is often a certain kind of activation, rather than what might be that more neutral place of choice. So that was definitely true for me. And the two relationships that were most active at that time, I had like a lovership that I was completing, and I had been in this kind of long-term on again, off again. And they just had, they had like these habits. Like I was really kind of activated by like the desire for my lover's attention in a certain way. And even if I could recognize it or I wanted it to be different, it was like, oh, there's a way that everything is orienting towards like, do I have his attention or do I not have his attention? And like that kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I'll just say like compulsive gesture, right? Like, do I have his attention or not have his attention? Mm-hmm. And with my long-term partner at that time, or this, I actually, at that time, I don't know that I would have called him my partner, but like this on again, off again, that had really had length, but had also just gotten into certain patterns. So sometimes I think they're just in us, right? Like cultural patterns that run, patterns from our family of origin, things we picked up along the way dating. And sometimes they're in the actual relational dynamic. So like between he and I, you know, he was the one that would take space. I was the one that would initiate. He would be in a certain way, or I would hesitate in this way, or I would hold back in this way. And it was just like, we were so stuck in these habits. But it was really helpful to just go like, you know what? Like I choose out for now, but out completely, not like, oh, I'm going to find a better person that I'm going to do it differently with, but I just choose out for now. Mm-hmm. And it really required not just with those two men in my life, but it actually, this whole process of really stepping back in that way. And for me, like the deeper piece was around coming in right relationship with the masculine, and not just men, but men and the masculine in myself, in life. And it ultimately required that I relate to like just about everything in my life differently because it was so deep to really pull back from what I do believe are both personal and then cultural habitual ways of being in relationship.
Mm-hmm. It seems it's actually very radical, I think, to choose, I'm going to be on my own for now, and actually to like choose that and to want that and to stand in that, because our culture has conditioned us into this idea of partnership and finding someone and all of that. Yeah.
I do think for women, you know, I'm not to like totally overgeneralize, but I notice, you know, men will more often carry like successful career or success around money or success in providing or like that. And that can live unconsciously like, okay, I'll know I'm successful if, and there's something that women carry, which is like to be in a relationship that there's like success in that. Oh, I'm a successful woman because I'm partnered. And I find that these are the kinds of things that women who are in the no man diet, they'll be like, oh, I don't believe that. Or like, I don't, you know, like, I know that's not true. And then they'll actually join the no man diet and they'll be like, oh my God, I actually didn't know how some of these things were hooking and looping in my own mind. And that is the value, I think, of that kind of reset and that kind of space, is that we start to be able to see things that it's so easy to hide in the everydayness of life and dating and relationship and how we normally do things.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're providing that opportunity for people to join a different field. Like they're tuning in energetically to like a different energy than what they're used to.
Yes. Yes.
What are some of the patterns that you've seen people come in with, and then like how have you seen them start to unwind or shift?
I mean, one of the big ones is, and it plays out in various ways, but just is, what is the habit way of relating to men I come in contact with? And sometimes that's just that, like right in the background. Oh, I wonder if he's single. Like, do I see a ring? Could he be the one, or could he be a one? Right? Like that's a way of relating to men that women come in contact with, or partner. There are women who go through who don't identify as solely heterosexual, but that way of looking to people rather than, you know, what we were talking about at the very beginning, right? The aliveness of a relationship, like what's actually here. And even there's a woman actually who's in the program right now who was celebrating. She's like, oh my God, I met a guy who like was hot and also seemed deep. And like, I told him no. And like, oh my God, this is amazing. I've never done this. And I thought there was that way that she chose her commitment to herself over the potential of who this person might be in her life. And like how often, not even just like, oh, I'm relating to that person's potential, but almost like, oh, what's the potential relationship? Like, what might this be for me, rather than actually being there for what is so in the moment.
Mm-hmm. I can already feel like the magnetism that starts to come from choosing yourself.
Yes.
I actually was just having a beautiful conversation with a friend yesterday who is a man, but has been in a similar place of like seeking and like wanting to date, wanting to find the one and all of that. And we've been on Kauai on this island. And I think the energy here of this island really holds that self-love piece and like that invitation to look more deeply inwards. And he was just sharing about like, yeah, like maybe in the first time in my life, I'm not seeking like the person. If I'm meant to be with someone, like it needs to be so right. It needs to be such the right person, like, and just feel so right. And I just don't need it if it's anything less than that. And it's like, that's a really powerful place to be in, to feel like either way, I'm good.
Well, and it's interesting. It's like, it is that piece you're pointing to, which is either way, I'm good. And then it points to this little thing that gets kind of hooked in, which is people say, I want to be in a relationship. I'm like, no, you don't. You want to be in relationship with a person who wants to be in relationship with you. Like there's actually there's a withness to being in relationship that is what people actually want, but it gets then classified into, I want a relationship. I want a man. I want, and it's like, no, actually you don't want any man. You don't want any woman. You don't even want any relationship.
Yeah.
It really does matter that it's good and, fulfilling and life-giving. And why would we ever want to be in a relationship that was anything less than that?
Yeah, totally. Yes. I've seen that in several women I know, just, so like, why am I still single? But then realizing like, they could have a relationship if they really wanted, like, absolutely. but it's like, that they're looking for something deeper. They're looking for that depth and that connection and that really being seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
And I think you pointed to something before this too, around how magnetic it is to choose yourself or to commit to yourself.
Mm.
And I think especially in this way where it's not, it sounds like the no man diet sounds like it's like eliminating or pushing away. But ultimately, it's just about that choosing of oneself. And it's setting a container and creating space that allows us to choose ourselves.
Mm.
And it is really, really common for women who they're like, I haven't been hit on for ages. And then I chose the no man diet. And suddenly I heard from 3 exes and a man asked for my number in the grocery store, and I'm like, I know it happens. This is not a sign from the universe to not do a no man diet. This is actually the sign that you chose yourself and to stay that path.
And I imagine like there are some addictive, compulsive, like things that come up in the beginning of just like, oh my God, like the way that we have been doing things or wanting to receive the endorphins or the stimulus of what could happen in the first new connection with a new potential partner, and the invitation is to sit through that and to like continue to help break the pattern that hasn't been working.
Yeah, I think there is both what can be uncomfortable around just changing habits. And then, and I imagine you and many other people have had some experience that, for instance, when we first start to meditate, sometimes it's really uncomfortable. Sometimes there's these bliss experiences, but sometimes it's like the first thing that happens is like, this is awful. Like, I don't like being with my own mind or sitting inside my own body in this way. And that does also happen inside like the first few weeks, especially like just, oh, I feel really sad. Or I knew I wanted a partner, or I thought I wanted that, but I actually wasn't present to how lonely I feel. And I think that's a very hard part of the journey. It's like, why would I stay feeling this way when I don't have to? Mm-hmm. But really holding the vision for women that not only does it's like it gets better on the other side, which is true, but also that there's something so profound about staying with ourselves when we don't feel good. Mm-hmm. And that too, like that's a beautiful part of ourselves too. Mm-hmm. And that we can want to be with ourselves even when we feel lonely or sad or angry. The same way that just about every woman I talk to wants a partner to be with her when she's sad or angry or lonely. And what is it actually to offer ourselves that same kind of love and compassion?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about just self-worth, because you've always struck me as someone who really stands in that. And I'm curious what your journey was. Like, was that always something you felt connected to, or was it, I'm sure, I mean, we all have our trials and challenges that help us learn and to stand strong. What was your journey of feeling like strong and worthy in yourself?
I think that's such a great question. And I love the way you framed it as a journey also, because I think that the idea of self-trust or self-worth can start to, like, unconsciously, we can hold it like it's a state. If I could just feel worthy, or if I could just be in self-trust, that somehow that, I mean, I think it does change everything, but that it, recognizing that it is a journey and that it's experiences and that it's actions and choices, not like a thing to attain. Mm-hmm. And I was actually just reflecting on something very similar recently, and there is one part of me that wants to say I actually do think I've had a pretty strong sense of self since I was very young, and so there's one piece that we might call, luck or a blessing, or I don't know, whatever we want to call that thing, of whatever helped me to feel some connection to myself from quite young. And then I think there is the piece that's a journey, like you're pointing to, which, and a lot of it came from making choices for myself. So I think this is, again, it's that tricky point of, oh, well, if I knew I was worthy, I would make this choice. Or if I had self-confidence, I would do this, rather than I don't know and I choose for myself anyway. Like I chose to leave college and I was terrible, like after a year. And I hid from my mother actually for like 2 weeks. I would tell my roommate in college not to tell her that I wasn't there, because I was so afraid. So it wasn't like, oh, I felt so confident and I just knew, and I was like so full of self-worth that I could make this choice. It was that I knew it was right for me. And even though I was scared what my mother would think and what my father would think and what I was going to do with my life, and that I made that choice anyway. And following that, there's so many pieces, right? But like the choice itself, following that, and then what came from that was like a huge piece of that. And that's ultimately where I chose to go to the monastery, right? To go back as an adult. And so the content of that had a huge impact on my life, but also just making that choice for myself, even though it made no sense, had a big impact on my life. And similarly, even though I look back at some of the ways that I left the monastery, and I basically followed a man and moved to San Francisco. And there's pieces where I'm like, oh, I was not as elegant as I could have been in that whole process. But I also look back and I think, oh, I really needed to leave like this very cozy nest that I had, and to come out into this big wide world where I knew nothing. And it was totally overwhelming. Like San Francisco was like so overwhelming to me. And to continue to make these choices along the way. It's more like it's like it's always been there, the self-worth or the worthiness. And then at the same time, I think it's also a process of continually remembering or re-choosing our self-worth.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Just that, what you said about leaving college, it made me think about, at least for a lot of the people I grew up with and what was normal for me growing up, it was like, you go to high school and then you go to college and then you get a job. And it was like, it didn't feel like there was a choice like within that. It was like you do these things and then you're granted permission to have your free choice. That's kind of what it felt like for me, at least. And I'm just recognizing how that doesn't really foster our intuition. Mm-hmm. Like the whole first 22 years of our life, we are just kind of put on this path. And that was a big thing for me, like 21, 22, feeling like, okay, I'm approaching this time where I actually get to make my own choices. And how like wavering that was to listen to intuition for the first time and to like start to choose it and make those choices. I'd love to hear just your journey with intuition and like how you've learned to trust it, and any other thoughts you have on just how we're raised.
Yeah, I mean, there's this, to me, it points to all these interconnected pieces. I love that you're pinpointing this piece. So the first thing that came up listening to you was I thought, oh, yes. So when I was a teenager, I would go to Tassajara, which is the monastery where I lived as a young child and then ultimately went back as an adult. But I would spend these chunks of time there and work. And so I'd live there and I was part of the community. And this points to, I think, what you're saying about how children are raised, or certainly sometimes we have jobs, or there's these different pieces, but there was something where I felt I was so valued as an integral member of the community who had a role on whatever crew I was working, right? Whether it was kitchen crew or a dining room crew or a cabin crew. And at, 14 years old or 15 years old, I was like, oh, I have value. And what I do, and I'm good at something alongside adults. And I think that's so important. So, I think about that with my kids, and it's interesting, this time we're in, right, with distance learning and stay home measures. And definitely one of the things I've looked at is like, what would a mentorship be for them? Or what's like a craft? What is a way, whether they end up choosing that, but to put them in that kind of actual creative mentorship, rather than like what it is to be a student and in a class and the education sort of piece, but to contribute to something and actually to like make with their hands, for instance, or to be part of running something. Or and one of my teachers at Mount Shasta does talk about that also. He says that, mentorship is really this lost art. And I think about that a lot. So intuition. There's sort of, again, simultaneously this place where I want to say all it ever takes is just the choice to listen. Like, we all have intuition. And if we're lucky, we have people in our life early on who either name it or acknowledge it in some way, right? Which I think is partly acknowledging our sovereignty, right? If at an early age, someone can say like, yes, you're a human and you get to have thoughts and feelings and responses that are not your parents or your teachers or your community. It helps to foster that, oh, I have these thoughts and feelings and knowings. But I also think we can do that at any point, and that we can be on either side of that, right? We can be the person that says like, oh, like I see you know something here. And in that way, support someone in reawakening to their inner knowing or their intuition. And then again, as when we're adults, it's so easy to be like, oh, all this time that's lost, or I wish I had discovered my intuition as a child. And it's always helpful to go like, yeah, but right now, right now, what do I know? Or what do I feel? What do I want beyond anything that anybody else wants or doesn't want for me? And we have that opportunity in every moment.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's more about the permission just to listen to it.
I think that's true. I really think like absolutely regular connection to our own body, or regular connection in the natural world, or like there's these things that can strengthen that. And so much of it ultimately is creating the space where we're quiet enough to listen, and then acknowledging what we hear, rather than like, oh, that's silly, or oh, that doesn't make any sense, or what will other people think, right? Like that, these are just common responses. And of course our intuition is going to be like, oh, why would I say things to her? She dismisses them every time. Maybe I'll just go sit here in the corner and be quiet, So our recognition, oh, I hear that. I hear this. Oh, I see this. Oh, I feel this, will naturally invite more expression from our inner knowing, our intuition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, making it a practice and paying attention to it, or even acknowledging it if you don't take action on it, but saying like, okay, this is here.
I actually think that piece is pivotal. Mm-hmm. I think I wrote a whole piece at one point where it was about that. I think one of the reasons people don't listen to their intuition is they're afraid of what they might have to do if they did. Mm-hmm. And so I talk about the practice, just like you just said, which is detangling the hearing or the seeing or the knowing what's there from an obligation to act on it. Mm-hmm. And that just that recognizing it's the first step, and it's essential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, breaking it down. That's helpful. A question I often like to ask is about overcoming fear or being with fear. And I wonder if there is anything that comes to mind in your career or in your love or anything of just like, what's a big fear that you've come up against or with in your life, and how have you worked with it and worked through it and come out on the other side, and what was that journey like?
I think that process of working with fear is so it is so deep and it is so potent. So when you ask that question, in my memory, kind of go to some different places. And one is that when we left the monastery when I was a child, so I have this particular experience of what I actually, if I ever take myself back there, it feels golden and warm, and I think I felt totally safe, which is an exquisite thing, I think, for any child to have for any period of time. And when we left, it was dramatic for me. Like it really was like a womb or a cocoon, and it was very, very striking. We were in a different place, and none of my friends were there, and we were much just separate from the whole community. And the place we moved to actually was objectively not that safe, and all these, and so I very much had this memory of kind of going inward and becoming more watchful. Like there was like being in everything, and then there was this experience of becoming more watchful. And so part of, like, when I remember that and your question, like, I think part of my journey around fear is almost to go back to prior to that and to remind myself that I'm now safe, most of the time anyway, right? To be just in it. Because I have a habit of being a watcher, of going like more objective. And I think a lot of that does come from that place of like, oh, this is not safe. I will be watchful. So some of the way I think, and again, this is where I think those embodied practice, like what is it actually just to be immersed as a full being and body in an experience and not holding any part back, like watching or waiting for who knows what, but like that holding back, and really consciously choosing to dive into experiences like that. And again, I can think of just other moments where I really made choices, even though I was afraid. Not pretending like I wasn't afraid, or not because I didn't feel any fear. And again, like some of them are all the way from, I think the first time that I told my partner, like, I love you, right? I was like, oh, like it felt scary. And then I was like, but it's true. So there like there it is. And that I think that it's in the actual doing or the gesture that I find out that on the other side, I'm still alive. Mm-hmm. And then I've had experiences like that then in my career also, where I, made offers or sort of reached out and said, I want to work, I want to do this. And I didn't know what would happen. But finding out that even just having done it, like, oh, I was still alive on the other side. So, and then often like also got a very positive response, like, oh, here I am still alive and good things are happening.
Yes. Sounds like creating some feedback loops where there's some positivity and you're like, oh, okay, feels safer to expand a little more. Yeah, I feel like asking about just self-expression, and that it feels related of just like how sometimes we have fear and it's like scary to express, but then we step outside that box a little bit. And I know in a lot of the work I do with women and groups of women, sometimes all they need is a safe place to share the thing they're most afraid to say or to express in a way that's different than their normal everyday. And then and there's a positive feedback from a really safe container like that. And then it's like they can bring that into their life and start to feel more of that trust and confidence. Yeah, how have you worked with self-expression or just safety in that?
Yeah, I think that is so essential because there's sort of this, it's almost like an ideal that gets held up. Like, I'm going to be fully expressed me everywhere, no matter what. And it doesn't matter what the response is. And then the truth is, it actually does matter. Like, of course it matters if someone is mean to us or rejects us or, is critical in some way. Of course that matters. And so as, maybe facilitators or teachers, right, we get to create those safe spaces. But I also think as individuals or as humans on this journey, that it's this nuanced dance of choosing spaces that are safe. And sometimes we have to I'm not quite sure how to say this, but it's like there are spaces we know are safe even when we don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And to both make these clear lines. Like, I was talking to my best friend the other day, and she was realizing she kept sort of gesturing in a friendship with someone who didn't want to be her friend. And it's a self-loving act to actually say, like, oh, I want to take my friendship somewhere else because it's actually, I'm hurting myself by continuing to reach out in a gesture of friendship with someone who does not want to return that. And so having some discernment there, and then at the same time recognizing those places. And sometimes it's with our partner, right? It's like my being doesn't feel safe. It's like, not the signals that tell me I'm safe are not signaling safety. And yet I actually know that I am. And so this is one of those places to, lean in or expand just a little bit or show 1% more of this part that I'm terrified about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read on your about page that you can speak in front of hundreds of people and you love it, but like sitting in a new environment with someone you've never talked to before can feel really uncomfortable. And I can relate to that. Yeah. And anything you want to share just around like sitting with anxiety or like discomfort or social situations or anything like that, what you've learned?
Totally. I mean, again, I think of myself as like actually fairly shy, and I'm kind of awkward. And so much, I mean, really, you hit the nail on the head, which is working with anxiety or discomfort. Because I think so much of it is, can I be with me when I feel like this? And so many of the things that we do, a woman in the No Man Diet actually just shared, she was asking for, ways to work with stillness and silence, because she noticed she like compulsively will fill the silence with people because it's uncomfortable. And I do think this is why we do certain practices. And some of them are like stillness meditation, and some of them are movement meditation, and some of them are expression, and finding the ways to actually do the practices because they're so uncomfortable. And it's like a weird paradox to say, like, here, do this uncomfortable thing. It'll help you. But part of what it does is it actually just builds our capacity to be with ourselves, first and foremost, when we feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And then it builds our capacity to be with other people when we feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And that the sign like that I want to, move, or that I feel nervous, or that I'm afraid what you're thinking of me, that those are not necessarily signs that anything is wrong, or that I need to do something, or that I should fill the silence, or that I must make things more comfortable. It's like, oh, this is just how I feel right now. And maybe I don't like it, but it no longer needs to signal some habitual response to change it. Mm-hmm. And I do, I think the people that I see that in the most consistently are people who have done some sort of long-term, for lack of a better word, I'll just say uncomfortable practice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so meditation, I think, really coming back to that, and this piece of, especially in the beginning, it can be really uncomfortable to sit with the discomfort, and yet you learn to expand your capacity with that. And then you see that it's always changing. And that's kind of like the finding peace within it. And, I'm curious, like, is meditation still part of your daily practice, or do you have other practices that you're working with right now?
Mm-hmm. And the one piece I want to drop in before I answer that question is having a consistent uncomfortable practice is really different than having a consistent punishing practice. Mm-hmm. So the tricky thing is that sometimes people will map those over and be like, I need to punish myself in this way. But also when they've been mapped over, then people sort of become unwilling to sit with discomfort because they associate it with punishment. So I just think, like, for each of us, it's important to go, I'm not here to punish myself. And there is a value in expanding my capacity to be with discomfort. Right? And that's just a nuance. It's like a lifelong detangling process. So the practices that I work with most often these days have more like breath and mantra with them than, really total silence, stillness meditation. I do more practices that involve connection with the natural world. And I work with my altar daily, like in some way. So in some way I really do think that stillness meditation can be an act of devotion to yourself, but a lot of the practices I work with more daily these days feel like more like devotional practices.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm. Yeah. And there was something else I wanted to ask about this last piece. Well, one thing I'm curious about, just anything that you're feeling alive or excited about coming up in just your own business and your work. Anything you want to speak to about that?
One of the things that it kind of happened like in the late fall of this past year, but I realized I was looking to potentially launch a program again, like run it for the second time that year. And I had this moment where I was like, oh, actually what I want to do more, like what felt so exciting, was to take my membership, which is ongoing. It's called The Collective. And I was like, I would rather put all that energy into making The Collective the most delicious feast ever. And that's totally the way that it came to me too. I was like, I just imagined like this huge table, and it was this cornucopia, and there were like all these options, and just like making it totally rich and nourishing. And so what excites me the most right now is that. And it's around like most of the things that I do. Like I just hired a guest teacher to come into the No Man Diet, which I've never done. but I have the biggest group I've ever had this year. And I was like, oh, this woman would teach the most perfect thing at this exact moment. And so like, oh, how can I just enrichen? I don't think that's a word, but like make an even sort of richer, more nourishing experience of what's already there. Mm-hmm. And what I love about the collective in that way is that it is this ongoing process. And so every layer that gets added to it, it just makes it that much more, I don't know what the word is, but just like abundant, like overflowing abundance for any woman as she joins. It's like, oh my goodness, this is already here. Oh, look, now we have community connection calls. Oh, look, there's like, this is upcoming. Oh, there's these things. And that feels so exciting.
Yes. And I'm really feeling the energy behind like your excitement of just about this and the energy of abundance. And I know, I was reading something you wrote just about like energy behind actions and how often the energy is the thing that is felt. Could you speak a little more about that? And how sometimes we have this intention and this action and it's like something else totally gets picked up on or perceived.
Yeah. I mean, I think the most classic example for that is, because again, we can even have positive intention, but there can be an energy underlying something. So like if I go to my partner and I want to ask for something, but I'm afraid in some way, or like I'm afraid he's going to feel criticized. And so I come to him and my positive intention is like, well, I don't want him to feel criticized. So I'm kind of withholding this, or I'm not going to say this part, or I'm going to use all the right words, right? We can learn all the right language. Like I'm going to praise him first, and then I'm going to use nonviolent communication. And then I'm going to, I'm going to ask and not demand, and I'm going to have all the right words. And again, it's like positive intention, but underlying that is like, oh, I'm afraid he's going to feel criticized. And so I'm withholding something. I'm not just saying something. That often then what will get transmitted is fear and withholding. Yeah. And then our poor partner goes like, they're like, no, they just say, because they don't want that. They're like a no to that energy, not actually a no to whatever it is I'm requesting. Or they're just like, why does this feel so weird? Why? Or they're like, why are you mad at me? And I was like, I can't say anything fucking right. Like I used all the right words, but they feel underneath this thing. Yeah. So frustrating.
Yeah, I can relate to that. My partner is super sensitive and picks up on that stuff.
Yeah.
Can't ever hide anything. Even if I'm not even consciously aware of what I'm feeling underneath.
Yeah.
He'll pick up on it.
He's like a barometer for you, which is kind of beautiful. Like, and this is the tricky thing is that I think sometimes it's actually more helpful just to say things out loud. Like, I feel really needy, or, I'm actually really mad about something and I want to make this request, or, and in that way, like, we don't necessarily need to express our anger at 100%. We don't necessarily need to process it, or it can be this thing, but it can just be like, this is, actually I'm angry. And then they're not guessing what's underneath, or like, rather than doing some weird song and dance to try to get someone to praise us or acknowledge us, just be like, I feel really needy. I would love it if you would tell me something you like about me.
Yes. I love the honesty. And I think, you've done many years of authentic relating, right? Mm-hmm. And can you tell us like the base of that? I actually just went to my very first authentic relating workshop like 2 weeks ago. So it's wonderful practice.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's one of the things I do love. It's like a dandelion, like it's just sort of disseminated over the entire world, and that in the different places it will arise, it probably has slightly different energies and intentions and what have you. But when we originally founded Authentic World, it was really this idea was that you can have great relationships and be authentic, which I think now, that was 20 years ago. And now we're like, duh, that's the best kind of relationship. It was kind of radical and revolutionary. Like, oh, I can be me. Like I can like exactly all the weird, quirky ways that I am. That's where the best relationship is going to come from.
Yeah. Yes. And so there's an invitation for people to practice. It sounds like, and when you come together in that space and you get to practice these different exercises and then bring that into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, well, Kendra, do you have any closing words for us? Anything I did think one more question before closing words. What advice would you have or invitations you might have for a woman who is feeling dissatisfied with her life?
Oh, that's a great question. So the advice that I would have is first and foremost, it's kind of like an honesty practice. So, and some of that is in the specificity. So I think sometimes when like this next part I'm going to say can go into bypass, but I don't mean it that way. So like on one side is honesty about, for almost all of us, almost all the time, there's something we like about our life. We might be dissatisfied in many areas, but there's like, oh, actually, I like where I live, or I like that I'm still in contact with my best friend from high school, or I like the way I look in these jeans. I don't know, it's just like, actually, there's something I like about myself. There's something I like about my life. And it's very easy, both in our lives and like in our relationships, if we feel unsatisfied, to be like, the whole thing is just shit. Like everything needs to change, rather than what actually needs to change. And so radical honesty about what actually is good and beautiful and working, at the same time as radical honesty in specificity around what I don't like or what I'm dissatisfied about or what I want more of. Rather than like, well, just I'm dissatisfied in my relationship. It's like, actually, I don't like how little attention I get. I want to have sex more often. I want him to ask me about my day. I need us to sleep together. Like these are specific things that we can address, that somebody else can address, that can be met. And just like, none of this is working. The individual can't really meet that, and neither can the people in her life. So I think that first step really is this radical honesty. And then, the other piece is kind of practical, and then this more overarching piece, which is that I think it's important to say, like, well, what is just one step? Like, what is like the tiniest step towards, if I had a compass and I was trying to just orient my compass towards true north. And rather than, oh, I see way over, across the river and up a hill and down a valley, like that's where I want to be. How do I get there? I'm supposed to get there tomorrow. It's just like, if I'm standing right here, if I orient my compass, what is actually just the very first step toward one thing that would take me closer to something that would feel good? And with that is the reminder that we can reorient at any point along the way. Like it's impossible. We are not trains that get set on a track and could possibly be on the wrong track. Like we are beings that actually have the capacity to change and shift every single day.
And it's the cumulative actions of those small steps, and suddenly you're living a completely different life.
It totally is. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I always feel like when I interview someone, it's like they're little nuggets that are just what I needed to hear, those pieces. Especially just, what you spoke to around energy and like the feeling behind something, and how often we try to mask it with all this pretty language and all the right, saying it the right way, when we can be even more honest and true with ourselves. And that's a really deep practice, like getting really honest with yourself, and then with others. Yes. So any closing words, thinking for anyone out there who, anything that intuitively comes to mind? And then I'd love to just close this conversation with a short prayer.
Yeah, what comes up actually is especially between women, I find this is true, is that there is distinguishing between comparison and inspiration. So when you were asking about a woman who's dissatisfied with her life, there's the genuine experience of something not working or not feeling good or wanting something different. And then there's the ping-ponging off comparison. Oh, but she has it like this. Oh, but she made that much money. Oh, but she's in a relationship. And rather than staying with, in my own seat, this is how I want it. And this is how that's different from how my life is in this moment. And it doesn't mean we can't look at someone and be like, oh, that's inspiring. I wonder what that might look like in my life, not as comparing myself to her, the way she looks, the way she moves, the way she works. But like, I remember, this isn't another woman, this is a man, but one time I went to like guest teach at a conference. And before we started, the teacher who was holding the whole conference had all the teachers together. And he was like, and then he offered a prayer. This was quite a long time ago now, but I just remember being like, you can do that? Like, you could just out loud ask everyone to participate in prayer? That's inspiration, right? I was like, oh, I feel the way that he's talking, but I don't do it out loud. So how do I bring that into my life? Not be like, oh my God, he's so much better than me. He gets to pray and I don't. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And if we catch ourselves in that comparison place, do you have any words of wisdom around how to come back to your center and how to shift that?
I mean, the main thing really is like, just do it. I mean, I do think it helps. I do think it helps to remember that we never have any idea what's going on in anybody else's life. And so there really is that question that goes, what is it about that I think I want in my life? And how would I go about implementing that? But I mean, I often have gotten to see behind the scenes, and I know people that are like held up as paragons of intimacy or of some kind of professional success or this. And I'm like, I know what's behind the scenes, and it's not perfect. And you might not want to work as much as they are. And you might really hate this thing that their partner does. Like, we just really have no idea what's going on in other people's lives. And the more we can remind ourselves of that without any judgment, the more we can just come back to, like, how does it actually feel to be me? And what do I want?
Yes. Such good reminders. Oh, well, let's just breathe that in for a moment and just like coming back into that breath and just the knowing that we each have a path to walk. And there are people that we meet on our path that are here as pillars for inspiration and maybe sometimes triggers and just that invitation of just to keep coming home to ourselves, to be willing to sit with discomfort, to be willing to not know or not have the answers, and also to sometimes just know and to have that intuitive sense and to give ourselves permission and that truth and that honesty that we can come to with ourselves. And then how when we change that relationship, it really ripples out into all the other relationships that we have, all the other people we meet. So I love to just like bring that all into the heart and just thanking everyone here listening today and thanking you with so much gratitude, Kendra. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and just being here in this space today. It's an honor to have you. Many blessings. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. If you liked it, share it with a friend or leave us a review on iTunes. You can also follow along on Instagram at Rising Woman Leaders and sign up for email updates at risingwomanleaders.com to be sure to receive all the new and inspiring content. Thanks again for being here. It's an honor to walk this path with you.